Hello, Paulo with Meditation Amsterdam. It's Monday at noon here. Week just started, had a very productive morning, and I had been thinking about a topic during the weekend that I really wanted to share because I had some very funny conversations about it, and it's something that had been playing in my mind already before. And it's this entire idea that we catch ourselves in heroes' journeys, and we believe that they're gonna come to some sort of happy conclusion if we only play our cards right, and if we only do the right things and add a little bit of luck into the equation and so on. And so I thought I'd elaborate a little bit on that. Now, I think that the hero's journey has been a very popular theme, especially when you look at sort of pop psychology and when you look at also the whole self-help industry. I think it grabs people's attention because it presents you with a sort of narrative in which you are this sort of lone hero who sets out to conquer and sets out to make his or her mark in the world. And there's always this. There are several elements to it, such as the achievement, the struggle. There's the element of thinking that you can control certain outcomes, and there is also the element of sort of leaving a legacy behind. In other words, what you could call kind of infinity projects or things that outlive you, such as your kids or whatever. So immortality projects, rather. Now, the reason this came up was thanks to a really funny conversation that I had with a friend of mine during the weekend. And I don't know, we always get into talking about all these interesting things. And this time we got into exchanging our funniest egoic fantasies, right? Now, I can't remember how we got there, but you may be familiar with the situation where, I don't know, somebody says something shitty to you, or something happens in which you fail to meet the moment, so to speak, and later on, you're home, or later that day or later in the week, you start thinking about it, and you go like, damn, I should have said this or that. And the more frustrating the event, the more your mind really wants to not just resolve it and be okay and neutralize the event, but your ego wants to win the encounter, right? It wants to come out on top in that interaction. and so we were talking about how over time, if you let that fantasy play out, over time your comebacks during that scene get more clever, and they get more, at first you just say something to put somebody in their place, but that's just not quite enough for the ego. You need to have a comeback that puts them in their place, but also shows that you are kind and funny, and that has several philosophical levels, and it's just irrefutable. It's just like there's nothing but a big silence on the other end of the conversation, because they've been shocked and enlightened, and everybody's laughing, and you say it very casually, right? Like it just comes out. So we were really laughing about this, because that's the typical way that the ego thinks that it can resolve stuff. And these stories get more elaborate over time, where you're just like heroic in your comebacks, and you're like totally suave and in control, but at the same time you're devastating, right? And there's just nothing that the other person can say in return. So we were really laughing about this, and then that got us into talking about, okay, so what are typical guy fantasies that are like these egoic fantasies that the mind goes on. And so I was sharing mine, right? And so mine had to do with like, essentially every guy wants to be Batman, right? Like you want to be the secret billionaire who's also a martial arts artist, and you see some sort of injustice happening, and with a single blow, somebody lands on the ground, and but you're kind to them afterwards, of course, because you were not using violence for your own gratification. You were just doing it for the sake of righteousness. Or the fact that, another recurring one for me is you'd be going out on a date and you're playing the normal guy, but there's really a fleet of sports cars in some sort of warehouse, and you have this amazing fortune that you made, but you don't talk about it and you don't make money anymore because you're so over that, right? That you're so above it and so down to earth that you don't want those attributes to be to come into the equation. So all those ridiculous fantasies of not only dominating on a certain area of life, such as your physical prowess or your verbal abilities or your business abilities, but the fact that you've maxed out and you've gotten so close to the top that you found something much more interesting, and then you're above it now, right? That you can't be bothered to even talk about it, or it's not an it's not an important element in your life. So you're humble on top of everything else and stuff like that. Spiritual dreams about, I don't know, being enlightened and stuff like that, or whatever it is. People flocking from all over the world to get your Buddha vibe. I don't know, you name it. The other one is like, you're doing groceries in your Ferrari because you're still down to earth, right? All these kind of idiotic ideas. For her, it was like, she was a top model, but she left all that world behind because it was too shallow or something like that, right? And she married Joe around the corner because that's good enough for her. So so the common theme, and we were laughing so hard at this because it was just like we had acknowledged just the idiotic nature of what the ego considers to be happiness, what it considers to be value, and what it considers to be power, right? So and you let those fantasies go rampant, and whenever you can, you do try to play some of those out, right? Whenever there's enough money to buy a sports car and stuff, I've done that myself, or with some other toys or things, and I have inevitably felt like an idiot whenever I do it. So that fantasy that the ego thinks is going to inflate you and make you feel on top of the world inevitably feels heavy and stupid, and just every single time. Or when you come back with a really devastating one-liner against someone, you make them feel really shitty, and then you feel really shitty, right? So it's almost like this. It's almost like the what was the American Psycho guy called? I can't remember the name of the character, but it was Christian Bale playing American Psycho, trying to win on every little level, and because he's a sociopath essentially, right? And the ego is sociopathic in its core, but because we don't recognize this, and because some of the fantasies tend to be less vulgar and less and more sophisticated, we buy into a lot of them. And you can recognize when you're an egoic fantasy because you are projecting a certain outcome in the future that you think is going to make you happy. That is the definition of an egoic fantasy, right? Anytime you're not in the present and completely content and full of sense perception of the present, which is where happiness comes from, because that's where the self resides, you are in an egoic fantasy. Some of them are benign, some of them are really idiotic, like the one about the Ferrari or whatever. But they inevitably have that element of placing you into a journey in time, as opposed to allowing you to be grounded in the moment. Now, this takes us back to the whole notion of the hero's journey, because if you listen to those egoic fantasies and their components, they have so much in common with the hero's journey, right? It's this idea that you are an individual, that there is a path in front of you in time that you need to traverse, and that there is a dragon that needs to be slain at the end of that path in order for you to save the damsel in distress, or to acquire the big castle, and whatever you want to call that, right? So there's a sense of conquest, and there's a sense of a journey, even if it's a spiritual one. Even if the objective of the journey is to, even if the dragon is the dragon of the ego, it has this contentious conquest element to it, and it has the element of journey and time embedded in it, and most importantly of all, it has the element of a hero. So it has the element of a you or a me in time going through a journey, and that entire construct is an egoic construct that is very problematic. Now, true to say that until the ego has been dissolved, or at least properly exposed, kept in check, you have no choice but to think that you are that there is a me that is trapped in time in a hero's journey that will present challenges and deliver goodies at the end. So that's where you start off from. However, the big irony about it is that when you start to do your spiritual cultivation, whether it is through just the practice of being in the moment, whether it's through formal meditation, or whether, depending on the path that you take, right? The path of study and knowledge, the path of jhana, the path of rightful action, or karma, or bhakti, which is the devotional path, whichever route you take in your meditative journey, you eventually start to become more able to happily sit in the now and to collapse past and future, and to be in the sensory present, right? So that your tendency to reminisce or regret things in the past, and therefore creating the axis of time backwards, and your tendency to look at the promise that the future holds, or the disaster that needs to be averted, and then creating the axis of time towards the future, starts to collapse. And when that begins to collapse, as you sit in the now, the me in time disappears, and the I of the now is all that is left. So that there is no journey, and so when time collapses, there is no journey in time. And the other thing that collapses is the me. In other words, the hero disappears. Right, the journey disappears, and there is no hero. Now, the hero is very persistent in its will to survive. So the ego and the story of this promise in the future is very alluring, right? So that the ego really clings to existence and wants to create a journey. It wants to create the effort and the story of me, and why I've been wronged, or why I'm on the way to something amazing that is not right now, but it's somewhere in the future when certain conditions are met. But as time collapses and the me disappears, the I reveals itself, sometimes temporarily at first, and then it starts to become very clear that the real hero's journey is not to slay the dragon, but to slay the hero, right? That the actual hero's journey is the one where the hero has to die for reality, for the higher self to arise. And so long as you cling to the hero and the idea of you as a me who goes in this journey and this story in which there's goodies and baddies, and there's a promise at the end, you have placed yourself as a me in time, and you've created the journey and the hero. And when you step out of that, then the journey disappears and the hero also disappears. So the real hero's journey is the one where the hero is about killing the hero and making the hero, the idea of the journey and the idea of the hero, disappear and go away, essentially, right? There is no such a thing. They're both ideas in your mind, and the only satisfaction ever to be found is in your ability to very deeply go into the now and to remain in the now, where none of these ideas are floating in your mind. So that's essentially the thought of the day, right? It's this acknowledgement that the hero needs to go away. It's just an idea. It's a fantasy. The hero's journey is an egoic fantasy, and that in order for that to happen, you need to you need to follow Dante's advice. If you remember, I have never read Dante's Inferno, but one phrase has become incredibly famous, which is when he says that abandon all hope, ye who enter here, as you step into hell. And it sounds like a negative thing, right? It sounds like, oh, now it's hopeless, right? Like you're doomed. But the abandonment of hope is the killing of the hero and his journey, so that the now can be fully accepted for what it is. It's almost, in a sense, really maturing and growing up, and all those fanciful possibilities that you entertained as a young person, in which you could be anything from an astronaut to a rock star to whatever, anything in between, start to collapse into a current actuality that it's in itself still full of possibilities. And the hero is it's a hopeful young man with lots of promise and lots of future. But the king, the archetype of the king, or the I and the higher self in the now, is one which has come to full understanding and full acceptance and full grips with the reality of where he or she sits in that moment, in that place and time. There is of course effort being made. That's fine. There are certainly things that we consider could make our life objectively better, and so on. But there is no sacrificing of the now, and there is no postponement of the sense of self and the sense of self-sufficiency in the now, as opposed to postponing it to saying I'm only going to be happy or feel good about myself when these criteria is met, and therefore painting yourself a little journey in which you are some sort of hero that goes out achieving things. So this is not to be confused with not having any discipline, not going out there for let's say claiming your place in the world and making a difference. Or, hey, even if you can set some rights wrong, of course, do it. I would never advocate violence. And if you can have a Ferrari and do your groceries and be down to earth, by all means do it. I would still love to do that. But I recognize it as a childish fantasy, which, it's vacuous of the meaning that you assign to it, right? And it's... It is almost like trying to buy your authenticity or your manhood through these external displays of power, right? Just like a very young man who's violent or whatever thinks that he can punch his manhood out of somebody's face, or acquire it by being with a certain type of woman. You still see it. Our egoic fantasies are facsimiles or sort of vapid cartoons of what real maturity and real success is like, and real power is about, which is about being able to go deeply into your own pain and into the reality of the now, and from there becoming more loving and more able to connect with other people to really make a difference in the world. So I hope that helps. I hope that gets you thinking about what your little childhood and egoic fantasies are about. Don't be afraid to make fun of them. That's what they're there for. I hope that helps, and I'll come back with more videos soon. Cheerio.